The thud of dirt hitting the coffin was loud, mostly because my parents were holding their breath. Mentally dividing the inheritance, they buried my grandmother in the cheapest box allowed by law, completely unaware that the woman they called senile had just handed me $4.7 million. They thought I was just a quiet, failed computer repair girl, an easy target. They were about to learn that the quietest people hold the deadliest access codes. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Harper. I stood silently at the edge of the freshly dug grave in one of Chicago's bleakest cemeteries, letting the biting wind numb my face. Down in the damp earth lay my grandmother Beatrice. They had placed her in a pine box so cheap it looked like it might splinter under the heavy weight of the wet soil. I kept my eyes fixed on the varnished wood, mourning the only person in this world who truly saw me. A few feet away, my parents, Richard and Evelyn, were failing miserably at pretending to care. The priest was barely halfway through the final burial rites, but their patience had long since evaporated. "This mud is completely ruining my suede loafers," Richard muttered under his breath. Though loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, he shifted his weight impatiently, inspecting a speck of dirt on his tailored trousers. Evelyn scoffed quietly, pulling her designer coat tighter around her shoulders to block the chill. "I told you we should have paved the pathway closer to the plot. My heels are sinking into this miserable grass. Can the man just speed it up? We have a strict schedule to keep." Not once did they look down at the grave. They did not shed a single tear. To them, Beatrice was not a mother or a grandmother. She was simply an expiration date they had been eagerly waiting on for years. I kept my posture slouched, hiding inside an oversized, faded trench coat. It was a physical manifestation of the cover I had meticulously maintained for the past 8 years. To Richard and Evelyn, I was a massive disappointment. A socially awkward girl stuck at a dead-end tech support job. They genuinely believed I spent my days crawling under office desks, untangling wires, and resetting passwords for $20 an hour. I purposefully crafted this pathetic facade to survive. My parents were toxic, narcissistic socialites who viewed everything and everyone as disposable assets to be exploited. By making myself look like a low-value, invisible failure, I successfully evaded their suffocating control and relentless demands. They ignored me, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The reality, however, was something they could never comprehend. I was not a help desk drone. I was a senior forensic data architect at Obsidian Nexus Intelligence. My actual job involved hunting down global corporate embezzlement rings, cracking encrypted offshore accounts, and dismantling white-collar syndicates. I operated in a world of high-level security clearances and algorithmic precision, tracing millions of dollars across international borders with a few keystrokes. Grandma Beatrice was the only soul on earth who knew the truth. Behind her sweet, elderly demeanor lay a mind as sharp as a razor, while my parents dismissed her as senile and shoved her aside into a corner of their lives. We spent every Sunday afternoon in her sunroom. We did not knit or bake cookies. We drank Earl Grey tea and decoded complex, heavily guarded financial systems together. She had an uncanny instinct for spotting anomalies in ledger data that even my most advanced software missed. We were a team. She was my anchor. And now, she was gone. The priest finally closed his heavy leather-bound book and stepped back, before the first shovelful of dirt could even be tossed onto the coffin. Richard cleared his throat aggressively. He did not offer a moment of silence or a single word of gratitude. Instead, he spun around to face Arthur Pendleton, the elderly estate lawyer who had been standing quietly at the edge of the gathering. "Arthur," Richard snapped, his voice cutting through the chilly autumn air with absolutely zero restraint. "There is absolutely no reason to drag this out. We are all incredibly busy people. I want the will reading scheduled for this afternoon. 2 o'clock sharp at your office. Do not be late." Evelyn nodded in agreement, already turning her back on the grave and walking briskly toward their idling luxury vehicle. Yes, let us get this miserable business over with. I remained rooted to the spot, watching them retreat. I did not speak. I did not argue. I just stood there, playing the role of the quiet, submissive daughter. But beneath the oversized coat, my pulse was steady and cold. They were rushing blindly toward a finish line they thought they had already crossed. They were so blinded by their own greed and arrogance that they failed to realize they were walking straight into a meticulously crafted trap. Arthur Pendleton's office smelled like stale coffee, ancient dust, and decaying paper. The air in the cramped room felt incredibly suffocating. The dark mahogany walls seemed to close in as my parents sat stiffly in the cracked leather chairs opposite Arthur's massive desk. I took a seat in the far corner, practically melting into the shadows. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 2:00. Arthur adjusted his thick glasses, heavily clearing his throat as he unsealed the thick manila envelope containing Beatrice's final testament. Richard tapped his expensive watch, glaring at the old man. "Let us skip the sentimental preamble, Arthur," Richard snapped, his voice dripping with condescension. "Just get to the asset distribution. We have an executive board meeting at 4:00. Arthur shot him a look of profound disappointment, but unfolded the crisp parchment anyway. His voice was raspy but steady. He read through a few minor bequests, a vintage brooch to a distant cousin, a small donation to the local library, and then the room plunged into a suffocating silence as Arthur reached the primary estate clause. "To my granddaughter, Harper," Arthur read out loud, emphasizing each syllable so there could be no misunderstanding. "I leave the entirety of my remaining liquid assets, totaling $4.7 million, free and clear of any trusts, stipulations, or parental oversight." The silence shattered. Evelyn leaped from her chair. Her hands slammed down on Arthur's desk so hard the heavy brass lamp rattled, knocking a stack of files to the floor. "That is impossible!" she screamed, her perfectly manicured face twisting into an ugly mask of pure rage. "You are reading it wrong. Let me see those papers." She lunged for the document, but Arthur calmly slid it out of her reach. "She was delusional," Evelyn shrieked, her voice echoing off the tight walls and making the glass panes in the window vibrate. Beatrice was completely hallucinating in those final months. She had severe dementia. She did not even know what year it was, let alone how to manage a liquid fortune of nearly $5 million. "This document is a complete fraud. I demand a full medical review. I want her physician on the phone right this second." Arthur remained entirely unfazed, folding his hands over the will. "Your mother-in-law passed a rigorous psychological evaluation by an independent, board-certified psychiatrist just 2 days before signing this document. Evelyn, the will is absolutely ironclad." Richard did not yell. He was much more dangerous than that. He slowly turned his gaze away from Arthur and locked his eyes onto me. He crossed the small room in 3 large strides, effectively trapping me in the corner. He leaned in so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath from his liquid lunch. "Listen to me very carefully, you little parasite," Richard growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "You are not taking a single dime of that money. It belongs to us. We built the foundation. We maintain the family legacy. You are nothing but a pathetic computer repair girl who cannot even afford decent clothes." He slammed his hand against the wall right next to my head, boxing me in completely. "If you do not sign that money over to us by tomorrow morning, I will crush you. I will hire the most ruthless legal team in the state. We will freeze your bank accounts. I will drag your name through the mud, destroy whatever pathetic little life you have built, and keep you tied up in court for the next 20 years. I will make sure you cannot even afford a bus ticket, let alone a lawyer to defend yourself. By the time I'm finished, you will not have one single penny to your name. Do you understand me?" I did not flinch. I maintained the exact same blank, lifeless expression I had worn since childhood. I looked him dead in the eyes and offered a single, slow nod. I accepted his challenge silently, Not a single trace of fear crossed my face. Later that night, the city of Chicago was wrapped in a freezing rainstorm. I sat alone in my dark apartment, the glow of 3 high-definition monitors illuminating my face. I bypassed my usual work networks at Obsidian Nexus Intelligence and securely routed my connection through 7 different encrypted proxy servers, bouncing my signal from Tokyo to Reykjavik before finally landing in Zurich. I was accessing Grandma Beatrice's hidden personal server. It was a private offshore digital vault we had built together exactly 2 years ago. I inputted the final 64-bit alphanumeric password. The screen flashed green. Access granted. Sitting right on the root directory was a single video file, dated exactly 3 weeks before her death. I clicked play. Grandma Beatrice appeared on the screen. She looked physically frail, wrapped in a thick shawl, but her eyes were burning with absolute, terrifying clarity. "Hello, Harper?" she said warmly, offering a sharp, knowing smile. "If you are watching this, it means the reading of the will happened today. Let me guess. Evelyn threw a tantrum, slammed her hands on the desk, and called me crazy. Richard cornered you against a wall and threatened to sue you into absolute oblivion." I let out a soft breath. She had predicted their behavior down to the very last detail. "They think they have you cornered," Beatrice continued, leaning closer to the camera lens, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "But they have no idea who you really are, and they have no idea what I found while digging through their accounts. It is time to end them. Sweetheart, open the folder labeled Foundation Audit. Let the games begin." The courier knocked violently on my apartment door. Less than 48 hours later, he shoved a thick, heavily bound legal petition into my hands. The cover bore the imposing gold foil crest of Cross & Associates. I knew exactly who Donovan Cross was. In the corporate intelligence sector, his name was synonymous with utter destruction. He was not merely a litigator, he was a mercenary in a tailored suit, notorious for utilizing aggressive media manipulation and psychological warfare to entirely break his opponents. He did not just want to win cases, he wanted to scorch the earth. I dropped the massive document onto my kitchen island and flipped to the primary accusations. The legal fiction they had constructed was breathtaking in its sheer malice. The petition formally accused me of elder abuse and psychological coercion. Cross had drafted 300 pages claiming that I, a supposedly antisocial tech addict, had employed predatory digital surveillance and intense emotional manipulation to systematically isolate Beatrice from the loving, protective embrace of her family. They alleged I had blocked her phone calls, filtered her emails, and brainwashed a frail, vulnerable woman into handing over her entire estate. It was a perfectly designed character assassination. I closed the binder. My pulse did not elevate a single beat. I walked over to my secure terminal and placed a direct encrypted call to my division director at Obsidian Nexus Intelligence. "I need an immediate, indefinite tactical leave of absence," I stated clearly, "effective as of 0800 hours today." My director, a veteran intelligence officer who knew my operational history, did not ask a single probing question. "Your clearance remains active. Whatever you are hunting, Harper, make sure you bury it." "That is the plan," I replied, cutting the connection. I initiated a Level 1 ghost protocol across my home network. The quiet, invisible IT girl was officially dead. I threw the heavy blackout curtains across my windows, plunging the living room into shadows. I booted up 5 interlocking high-performance mainframe stations that I kept hidden behind a false wall. The cooling fans roared to life like jet engines. Lines of complex code began to cascade across the panoramic monitors. This was no longer a petty inheritance dispute. This was a highly tactical, surgical strike. I was preparing for the digital equivalent of the heist of the century. I opened the heavily encrypted folder Beatrice had pointed me toward on her private server, to crush them permanently. I could not rely on stolen data. I needed to establish a completely legal, unassailable chain of forensic evidence. I deployed a swarm of autonomous search crawlers, programming them to relentlessly sweep the public tax filings and corporate registrations of my parents' supposedly philanthropic empire, the Global Horizon Relief Fund. On the surface, their charity was an immaculate beacon of high society generosity. They hosted $2 million fundraising galas, smiled brightly for the paparazzi, and claimed to be building sustainable, clean water infrastructure in drought-stricken developing nations. They were celebrated as pillars of the community. But Beatrice had found the loose thread, and I was about to yank it until their entire fake empire shattered. Utilizing my federal auditing credentials, I legally subpoenaed the redacted financial ledgers from their primary banking institution. I began the arduous process of cross-referencing their reported charitable donations against the actual, granular operational expenditures. I tracked every single wire transfer, every invoice, and every contractor payment over the past 5 years. The architecture of their fraud was incredibly arrogant. Richard and Evelyn were skimming massive, illegal percentages straight off the top of every single public donation. They were routing the stolen funds through a complex labyrinth of dummy corporations that they had cleverly disguised as foreign construction contractors. They were buying ghost materials for ghost projects. I dug even deeper, infiltrating the federal compliance database. That was when I found the ticking time bomb. The United States Revenue Service had officially scheduled a comprehensive, mandatory federal audit of the Global Horizon Relief Fund. The audit was set to commence in exactly 3 weeks. If those federal inspectors looked at the unedited books, my parents would be completely exposed as fraudsters. I ran a rapid predictive algorithm to calculate the exact financial deficit hidden within their charity accounts. The system processed the numbers for a tense 30 seconds before the final calculation chimed. The number flashed across my center monitor in bright red text. The missing amount was exactly $4.7 million. I sat back, letting the beautiful, devastating reality wash over me. That was the missing puzzle piece. That was why they were acting with such psychotic desperation. They did not just want Beatrice's money out of pure greed. They needed my inheritance to plug the massive, gaping hole in their fraudulent charity before the federal government tore their lives apart. If they did not replace that exact sum of $4.7 million within 21 days, Richard and Evelyn were going straight to a federal penitentiary. But a truly elite forensic architect never stops digging at the first layer of dirt. I wanted to burn the entire forest to the ground. I initiated a deep packet trace on the routing numbers of the offshore shell companies receiving the embezzled funds. The money was bouncing erratically from the Cayman Islands to Panama, attempting to lose its digital scent, before finally washing up in a highly secure private trust located in the Bahamas. I executed a brute force decryption on the digital signature attached to the Bahamian trust account. I needed the name of the registered beneficiary. When the decryption progress bar hit 100%, I leaned forward and let out a sharp, genuinely amused laugh. The trust was not owned by Richard. It was not owned by Evelyn. The primary signatory and sole beneficiary of the dark money account was Donovan Cross. Their ruthless, high-priced attack dog was not just representing them in a civil lawsuit, he was their chief money launderer. He was the architect of the entire offshore shell game. He was pocketing a 20% cut of every single stolen charity dollar. They thought they had cornered a helpless victim in a dark alley. They had absolutely no idea I had just locked the gates, barred the exits, and was standing there holding the matches. The heavy oak doors of courtroom number 312 at the Cook County Courthouse swung open. I walked down the center aisle completely alone. The gallery was practically empty, save for a few bored law clerks. I wore a simple, unbranded charcoal suit. I carried no briefcase, no thick stacks of printed legal precedents, and no defensive team. My hands held nothing but a single, solid black titanium tablet fortified with military-grade biometric security locks. Moments later, the double doors burst open again. Donovan Cross made his grand entrance. He did not walk. He paraded into the room, flanked by 3 junior associates who were practically tripping over themselves to carry his massive leather bags and presentation boards. Cross wore a bespoke navy suit that probably cost more than my apartment. He spotted me sitting alone at the defense table and let out a sharp, booming laugh that echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. He strutted over to my table, leaning his knuckles against the polished wood. Showing up to a high-stakes civil litigation without a single defense attorney? Cross mocked, his voice dripping with venomous pity. I actually feel bad for you. Harper, I really do. Did you genuinely think you could just walk in here, bat your eyelashes, and ask the judge to play nice? You are entirely out of your depth. We are going to have this wrapped up in less than 2 hours. Try not to cry when the ruling comes down. I did not blink. I did not offer him a single word in response. I simply looked at him, visualizing the invisible crosshairs locking directly onto his forehead. The bailiff announced the arrival of the Honorable Judge Marcus Sterling. We all stood. Sterling was a no-nonsense veteran of the bench, peering over his reading glasses with a look of perpetual exhaustion. He banged his gavel once and instructed the plaintiff to call their first witness. Cross immediately called Evelyn to the stand. My mother glided up to the witness box, dressed in somber, elegant black, clutching a perfectly folded silk handkerchief. The moment she took the oath, the theatrical performance began. Please, Mrs. Sterling, Cross said, adopting a tone of gentle manufactured sympathy, tell the court about the final year of your beloved mother-in-law's life. Evelyn took a deep, shuddering breath. She dabbed her perfectly dry eyes with the handkerchief. It was an absolute nightmare, she whispered, her voice trembling with expertly practiced sorrow. My poor Beatrice was slipping away from us. Her mind was gone. But the worst part was not the illness. The worst part was Harper. She locked us out. She changed the security codes on Beatrice's house. She intercepted all of our phone calls. We just wanted to hold her hand, to show her love in her final days. But Harper completely brainwashed her. She convinced a sick, confused old woman that her own family was trying to hurt her. Evelyn let out a dramatic, heartbreaking sob. Cross nodded solemnly, letting the silence hang in the air to maximize the emotional manipulation. He had choreographed this scene flawlessly. Thank you, Evelyn, Cross murmured gently. No further questions. Next, Cross called his heavily compensated medical expert to the stand. A smug, polished man in his late 50s adjusted his tie as he sat down. He introduced himself as a premier neurologist. Doctor, Cross prompted, projecting his voice for the entire room. Based on your thorough review of the patient files, what was Beatrice's mental state at the time she signed the revised testament? The doctor pulled a thick folder of fake secondary medical charts from his briefcase. My professional assessment is absolutely conclusive, the doctor stated loudly, making sure to make eye contact with Judge Sterling. The patient was suffering from advanced, stage 4 neurodegenerative decline. She experienced severe auditory and visual hallucinations. She had zero spatial awareness and possessed the cognitive capacity of a toddler. The idea that she could comprehend the legal transfer of a multi-million-dollar estate is medically impossible. The woman could not even remember her own name. Cross smiled triumphantly and returned to his seat. He had built what he believed was an impenetrable wall of lies. Judge Sterling sighed, turning his heavy gaze toward my lonely table. Does the defense wish to cross-examine the witness? I stood up slowly. I picked up my titanium tablet. No, Your Honor, I do not have any questions for this specific witness. However, I would like to submit Defense Exhibit A directly into the court record. It requires the use of the primary multimedia projector. Judge Sterling waved his hand dismissively. Proceed. I walked past Cross, who was grinning like a shark that had just cornered a bleeding seal. I stepped up to the clerk's podium and plugged a secure auxiliary cable into my tablet. I bypassed the standard court network and cast my screen directly onto the massive high-definition monitor mounted on the wall directly above the witness box. I tapped the play button. The courtroom was instantly filled with the sharp, crystal-clear voice of Grandma Beatrice. The video on the screen was stamped with a verified, unalterable digital timestamp indicating it was recorded exactly 7 days before her passing. Beatrice was sitting at her mahogany desk. She looked pale, but her posture was perfectly straight. Directly behind her was a massive white board completely covered in incredibly complex, multi-layered cryptographic algorithms and advanced calculus equations. The corrupt neurologist sitting directly underneath the screen went completely rigid. His jaw dropped. Good morning, Your Honor, Beatrice said, looking directly into the camera lens with terrifying, lucid intensity. If this video is playing in your courtroom, it means my pathetic son and his wretched wife are currently attempting to contest my final will. They have likely hired a bottom-feeding lawyer to claim I am suffering from dementia. As you can see by the quantum encryption algorithm I just finished solving on the board behind me, my cognitive functions are operating at peak efficiency. A collective gasp rippled through the few people in the gallery. Cross leaped out of his chair, his face draining of all color. "Objection!" Cross roared, slamming his hands on his table. "This is a fabricated digital manipulation. This is not admissible." "Overruled!" Judge Sterling snapped, his eyes glued to the screen. "Sit down and shut your mouth. Mr. Cross." On the screen, Beatrice leaned closer to the camera, a cold, predatory smile spreading across her face. "I am leaving every single asset I own to my granddaughter Harper for one very specific reason. Richard and Evelyn do not run a charity. The Global Horizon Relief Fund is a massive, heavily orchestrated money laundering syndicate. They have been stealing millions from disaster victims to fund their miserable, lavish lifestyle. And I refuse to let a single penny of my hard-earned wealth be used to plug the massive financial crater they have created." Beatrice paused, taking a sip of tea, her eyes shining with absolute defiance. "They think they can bury the truth with me, but they forgot one crucial detail. I taught Harper everything I know, and she is about to show you exactly where the bodies are buried." I disconnected the tablet, letting the screen fade to black. The silence in the courtroom was absolute and deafening. I slowly turned my head, locking eyes with Donovan Cross. His arrogant smirk was completely gone, replaced by the hollow, wide-eyed stare of a man who just realized he was standing on a landmine. The courtroom exploded into absolute chaos. The handful of clerks in the gallery were suddenly on their feet, murmuring feverishly. The corrupt neurologist in the witness stand looked like he was going to vomit. His hands gripping the wooden railing so tightly, his knuckles turned entirely white. Donovan Cross completely lost his carefully manicured composure. He lunged over his table, knocking a heavy glass pitcher of water onto the floor, where it shattered into dozens of jagged pieces. "Objection! Objection! Your Honor!" Cross screamed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. The veins in his neck were bulging against his silk collar. "This is a highly sophisticated deepfake. It is fabricated artificial intelligence. The defense is attempting to introduce unverified, highly manipulated digital media to slander my clients. I demand this exhibit be struck from the record immediately." Judge Sterling gripped his gavel, his face turning an angry shade of crimson. "Mr. Cross, if you scream in my courtroom one more time, I will hold you in criminal contempt. Sit down." I did not wait for Cross to recover. I stepped away from the multimedia podium and walked directly to the center of the room. I reached into the inner breast pocket of my charcoal suit and pulled out a solid leather wallet. I flipped it open and placed it squarely on the judge's bench. "Your Honor," I stated, my voice echoing clearly over the lingering murmurs, "I am not relying solely on a video. My name is Harper. I am a senior forensic data architect, holding a Level 5 federal security clearance at Obsidian Nexus Intelligence. I am also a fully certified federal forensic auditor. Attached to my credentials is a comprehensive, government-authenticated financial tracing report, fully authorized under the Federal Racketeering Act." Evelyn let out a choked, horrific gasp. She gripped Richard's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit jacket. Richard's jaw dropped, his eyes darting wildly between my face and the federal badge resting on the judge's desk. The pathetic, invisible tech support girl was gone. In her place stood the exact person engineered to destroy them. "What is the meaning of this?" Judge Sterling demanded, though his tone had shifted from annoyance to sharp, intense focus as he examined my federal seal. "It means, Your Honor, that this is no longer a civil dispute over an inheritance," I replied coldly. I tapped my titanium tablet, sending a massive, interconnected web of financial documents to the main projector. "I am formally submitting evidence of a massive, multinational embezzlement syndicate operating under the guise of the Global Horizon Relief Fund. I turned to face my parents. They were entirely paralyzed, trapped in the harsh glare of the projector light. "Let us look at the routing numbers, shall we?" I announced, pointing at the screen. On the 14th of October last year, the Foundation received a massive influx of public donations earmarked for hurricane disaster relief. 2 days later, $1.2 million was wired from the charity's primary holding account to a shell corporation in the British Virgin Islands. From there, the funds were split. $500,000 went into a private escrow account to finalize the purchase of a luxury ski chalet in Aspen. The remaining $700,000 was used to secure a beachfront villa in Tuscany. Both properties are secretly deeded to Richard and Evelyn. "Lies!" Richard barked, though his voice was thin and shaking violently. "You are making this up. You hacked our personal files." "I did not hack anything," I countered smoothly. "I simply followed the digital breadcrumbs you were too arrogant to sweep up. Every single transaction displayed on that screen has been verified by the Federal Banking Commission. I have 72 distinct wire transfers meticulously documented, proving that you stole over $12 million from disaster victims over the past 5 years. The $4.7 million you are currently trying to steal from my grandmother's estate is exactly the amount you need to pass your upcoming federal tax audit." Judge Sterling was rapidly flipping through the physical pages of the dossier I had transmitted to his terminal. His expression grew darker with every page he read. Donovan Cross, realizing the ship was rapidly sinking, desperately tried to save himself. He took a massive step away from Richard and Evelyn, throwing his hands up in a gesture of absolute surrender. "Your Honor," Cross pleaded, his slick arrogance completely replaced by cowardly self-preservation. "My firm had absolutely no knowledge of these fraudulent activities. We were retained purely for civil probate matters. We were deliberately misled by our clients." I slowly turned my head toward Cross. A predatory smile finally broke across my face. This was the exact moment I had been waiting for. "Are you absolutely sure about that, Mr. Cross?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal register. I tapped the tablet one final time. The screen wiped clean, replacing the real estate documents with a highly classified, encrypted contract from a private bank in the Bahamas. "This is the foundational charter for a dark money offshore trust," I explained, projecting my voice so every single syllable struck like a hammer. "It is the primary holding tank for 20% of all the embezzled charity funds, the laundering fee. The digital signature authorizing the creation of this trust is heavily encrypted. But unfortunately for you, I specialize in cryptography." I hit the decrypt button. The progress bar flashed across the screen for 3 seconds before revealing the unmasked, legally binding signature. "The sole beneficiary and active manager of this illegal offshore account is Donovan Cross," I declared. "You did not just represent them, Mr. Cross. You built the entire laundering infrastructure. You are the central accomplice." Cross let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. His knees visibly buckled. He grabbed the edge of his table to stop himself from collapsing onto the floor. His 3 junior associates immediately backed away from him, staring at him as if he were covered in a deadly virus. Judge Sterling did not hesitate. He slammed his heavy wooden gavel down with such ferocious force that the sound echoed like a gunshot. "This civil proceeding is suspended indefinitely," Judge Sterling roared, his voice trembling with righteous fury. He picked up his desk telephone and smashed the emergency security button. "Bailiffs, lock the doors. Do not let a single person leave this room. I want federal marshals down here right this exact second." 2 massive, armed court officers instantly moved to the heavy oak double doors, sliding the solid steel deadbolts into place with a loud, terrifying clack. The corrupt neurologist tried to slip out the side exit, but a 3rd officer shoved him violently back into his seat. I stepped back from the podium, quietly clasping my hands behind my back. I stood perfectly still in the center of the locked courtroom, letting the absolute devastation wash over the room. Evelyn was hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she clawed at her own throat, her perfectly crafted socialite mask entirely destroyed. Richard was slumped over the defense table, his face buried in his hands, making a pathetic, high-pitched keening sound. They were looking at decades in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Their wealth, their status, their freedom were completely obliterated in a matter of minutes. I looked at them, feeling absolutely nothing but cold. Pure vindication. They had spent my entire life treating me like a ghost. Now, they were going to spend the rest of their lives haunted by me. Judge Sterling did not waste another breath. He officially dismissed the plaintiff's lawsuit with prejudice, slamming his gavel down with absolute finality. Within minutes, he signed an emergency judicial order transferring the entirety of my encrypted dossier directly to the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom eventually opened, but not to let anyone out. A team of federal agents swarmed the room. Richard and Evelyn were violently pulled to their feet. The cold, heavy steel of federal handcuffs clicked sharply around their wrists. Evelyn was crying real tears now, her mascara running down her expertly contoured cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. Richard stared straight ahead, completely hollowed out, a dead man walking. They were marched out of the courthouse and shoved into the back of a heavily armored police van. A sea of reporters and flashing camera lenses surrounded the vehicle. The local press had already been tipped off, violently shoving their microphones forward, eager to capture the spectacular downfall of the most beloved philanthropic couple in the city. Donovan Cross was escorted out right behind them. His prestigious career was instantly incinerated. By the end of the week, the State Bar Association issued a permanent disbarment order, but losing his legal license was the absolute least of his problems. Facing multiple federal indictments for criminal conspiracy, wire fraud, and severe money laundering, the arrogant lawyer who loved to destroy lives was now staring down a guaranteed 20-year sentence in a federal facility. With the civil case completely obliterated, the probate court cleared the estate transfer in record time. $4.7 million hit my secure account exactly 48 hours later. I did not keep it all. I took precisely half of the fortune and established the Beatrice Horizon Endowment. It was a massive, fully funded scholarship trust designed exclusively to support underprivileged female students pursuing degrees in advanced data science and forensic cryptography. Grandma Beatrice's legacy would not be a stolen ski chalet in Aspen. Her legacy would be an army of brilliant women trained to hunt down corrupt men. On Monday morning, I walked back into the high-security lobby of Obsidian Nexus Intelligence. I did not wear the oversized, faded trench coat. I had thrown that pathetic tech support disguise into a dumpster the night before. Instead, I wore a sharply tailored, midnight blue blazer. I felt an overwhelming sense of genuine freedom. I was no longer hiding from my toxic family. I was just Harper, the apex predator of the digital forensic world, returning to the hunt. The following Sunday, the sky over Chicago was beautifully clear. I drove out to the cemetery. The wet, messy mud from the funeral had been replaced by a beautiful, thick layer of fresh green grass. An elegant, custom-engraved marble headstone now rested peacefully over the plot. I stood quietly in the cool breeze, holding 2 steaming cups of the most expensive artisan dark roast coffee I could find in the city. I drank from one cup, letting the rich, bitter taste ground me. Then, I slowly tilted the second cup, pouring the dark liquid directly onto the rich green grass right in front of the marble stone. I smiled warmly, looking down at the name carved into the pristine white rock. "Checkmate, partner," I whispered to the wind. "Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Boss Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we would love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you are listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.